welcome to the Week 2 recap show for the Beltway Wars Invitational with your host Adam Jackson, and with me as always is Patrick Wheelton. Say hello, Pat.
Hello.
So we're going to be going over Week 2 just like we did Week 1. We're going to be going over each matchup, some players that we thought did well, some players that need to improve, and at the end of each analysis, we're going to go over uh, the over under on the win totals that we think each team's going to have at the end of the year. So I'll give Pat a number like 5, and he'll say they'll get more than 5 or less than 5 wins based on your roster construction as it is of week 2. Just because we have a better idea of, the production of each team in terms of seeing them through 2 weeks. So with our first matchup, uh, Union Bridge Battalion, myself, lost to Dustin Summers, the Pikesville Prowlers, 125-44 to 136-82. Close matchup, and I wanted to go over my team first, because always.
Selfish.
Um, the biggest concern, I have two concerns with my production this week from two players, and that would be Clyde Edwards-Helaire and George Kittle, each scoring, Edwards-Helaire scoring 2.6 points, and George Kittle having another kind of disappointing week with a 3.7, 4 catches, 17-yard day against Philadelphia, which you can definitely score against. What do you think the season outlook for Clyde Edwards-Helaire is? Should I be concerned?
Well, first of all, I'll just say, even though that hurt your team and his poor game, he definitely was the MVP for the Ravens this week in fumbling
That
that
is
ball late.
100%.
So you hate to see it, but you also love to see it. So not too bad there. I mean, in all seriousness, I think he'll be okay. I don't think that there's a ton of talent behind him. I know they've got, oh gosh, he's one of the guys that has the same name as a bunch of other guys in the league. It's like Daryl Williams, right? Who's his backup? I dropped him a few weeks ago, I think. He might have just got scooped up. But anyway, they don't have a ton of, I don't think, talent behind him. I think he's a talented. He's in his second year. He carried the ball 13 times. It was an over 10 game. You would have liked to see him get more work. So yeah, you might have a little bit of concern there. I think it's maybe a little bit too early to be overly concerned with him. You've got some people on your bench that you can plug in there if he's got a bad matchup. Zach Moss is on the bench, had a nice week, sort of his first game of the season. He missed week 1. Ingram had a down week, but he's maybe a plug and play guy. So I think you've got some plug and play opportunities on your bench. I don't think it's going to be too big a deal for you. But I am concerned about George Kittle, and I feel like this is the second week in a row that we've talked about George Kittle's lack of production. He had a subpar week 1, and you were able to get a big victory, but not enough to pull it out, losing by 11 to Dustin. Kittle, not very involved. He caught all 4 of his passes for 17 yards in a low-scoring game in Philadelphia. I don't know. I don't know what to think of the San Francisco offense. They're kind of having some running back issues. They're having some wide receiver kind of weird things going on there. So something doesn't feel right in San Francisco. You'd think Kittle could benefit from it, but we'll have to see. On the good side this week for you, Lockett over 100 yards for the second week in a row, going for 8 for 11 for 178 and a score. 27.8 fantasy points. Big day from Tyler Lockett. That's great to see. And then the only thing concerning for next week, as I'm sure you are all over the wire looking at this, but Amari Cooper coming out of this week 2 tilt against the Chargers with a rib injury that, they have a Monday night game next week. So you're going to have to be playing that, monitor the injury reports throughout the week, and have to potentially make a call on Sunday if you're going to kind of roll the dice and keep him in there for Monday or sub him out. Obviously, great player for you, had a great week 1, so that's going to be a tough call in week 2.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you know, Jerry Jones keeps nothing close to the chest, and he's very hopeful. It says right here in the latest news, hopeful that he will be ready for Monday night. It's ribs, you can kind of play through that. We've seen wide receivers in the past play through that, and I think that he will be okay, or at least I'm trying to convince myself that he will be okay going forward. Um, but that's about. I mean, yeah, it was kind of a disappointing loss. Wanted to beat Dustin, obviously, but just wasn't in the cards. Let's go over to. Oh, okay. Well, the over under for me for wins. I'm gonna put it at 8. Over or
Eight
under 8
wins.
wins.
Oh boy.
So 13 weeks. So that would be 8 minus 13.
8-5. 8-5. Um, I I still think I actually think your team is a little bit better than that. I think the level that Tom Brady's playing at, you've got Dalvin Cook on this team. Kittle will come around. I think you've got enough talent stack that you might be able to notch 9 or 10 wins. So I'll take the over on 8.
And I will take the over as well at 8 total. I think that I get to 8-5. Going over to Dustin, the victor of week 2, finally getting the win on the board, 1-1 now. Just looking at his squad, the big day from Cortland Sutton, 159 on 12 targets against Jacksonville. Terry McLaurin on Thursday night doing a great job, 107 from touchdown. Nick Chubb having 95 yards on only 11 carries. Very productive day for him against Houston. And Travis Kelce, as we all saw on Monday night, going 109 receiving yards and a touchdown in that crazy play where he basically ran across the field against the Ravens and the Ravens forgot how to tackle. Dustin's team, as I said in the preseason, I didn't really like it. There were some question marks at running back and quarterback. Baker Mayfield, it's saying questionable on here. He says no cause for concern as I'm pulling that up right now. But the injuries are starting to kind of pile up for him. Everyone seems to be getting a little banged up. What was the main takeaway for Dustin's Week 2 victory?
For me, it's the fact that he didn't really have a weakness. I think everyone did enough to sort of combine to overwhelm your club. Your lowest scorer is the Washington defense, who gave up 29 points, 4 sacks, no turnovers on the Giants. So that's why their point score was a little bit lower. But from skill position wise, just up and down the order, receivers, tight end, Kelce, great game, 20 points. No one really shit the bed, if you will, this week for Dustin, and they combined for a great week. I was wrong about Terry McLaurin after last week. I made it a point to talk about the injury to Fitzpatrick last week. I said McLaurin would be the biggest. He would suffer the most from that injury, and clearly I was wrong. With the backup quarterback in there in Washington, McLaurin goes 11 for 14 for 107 and a touchdown. Great game. I mean, it gives you hope moving forward. It was against a lackluster Giants team, but we'll see. I mean, obviously, there was a good connection there from the quarterback to the wide receiver, McLaurin, and we'll see if he can keep it up. But I like what I see after that. The one mystery that I have, and I'm curious, I don't know if this was a timing thing, but we made fun of Dustin. You made fun of Dustin coming out of the draft with 3 quarterbacks. He's now got 4 quarterbacks on the roster. Ryan Fitzpatrick is still there for some reason. Not taking up an IR spot either. So not sure he's got Fitzpatrick, Winston, Tua, and his starter Baker Mayfield. So Dustin really laying it on thick with the quarterbacks on the bench there. Not sure what that's about.
Yeah, and his options are going to become limited, especially if Tua is out for a significant period of time. You just already said Fitzpatrick. Looking at the latest news of Tua, it looks like it's just bruised ribs, but he hasn't had an injury history in the past. Maybe his thought is he just can't find anything on the waiver wire that's even worth rostering at this moment. That's not a strategy I would take. But that's the only thing. The waiver wire is very thin at the beginning of the season because if they were valuable, they would have been drafted. So I'm going to give the over-under for Dustin at 6. What do you think? 6 wins or over for Dustin?
I thought you were going to say 6. I will take the under. I think it's maybe closer to a 5-win team. I think, like you said, the injuries are stacking up. I don't trust these receivers. I don't trust Sutton and Jamar Chase to be, top flight starters for this team. I think there's enough question marks that I'm not ready to say it's more than a 5-win team at this point.
Yeah, I would go under as well. One final thing on Dustin's team is Mike Davis. Cordell Patterson is there, and he does have a role in that offense. A lot more than I thought he would, and it's only showing for 9 carries for him. He was very involved in the passing game, 7 for 7, 25 yards, which obviously saved his day. I'm just a little bit concerned that he's not getting all the work in an offense that could be explosive. Maybe it was just because of how good the Tampa Bay run defense is that he didn't see anything. Just something to be concerned about with Mike Davis, maybe not getting all the opportunities that he was promised in the offseason. So going on to our next matchup here, it's our other host, Patrick Wilton, with his first win of the season, 119.48 to 110.76 over Josh Hughes. Looking at your team, you had a lackluster day from Dak Prescott, but it did not matter because King Henry took over. 44.7 points, 35 carries. My goodness. What a workhorse in Tennessee Derrick Henry was, and that is exactly what you were envisioning when you drafted him. What was it, 4th overall? 3rd overall? Little bit of concern, the lack of production out of A.J. Brown. Antonio Brown came back to earth this week. A.J. Brown, he had a couple drops. 3 for 9, 43 yards, and he got outplayed by Julio Jones. That offense still seems to be trying to find its identity a little bit in the passing attack. Are you concerned about A.J. Brown going forward?
A little bit, yeah, and my wide receivers generally a little bit of concern, including Antonio Brown, who
Ridley did come back this week with 7 for 10, 63 yards and a touchdown, so you have to love to see that.
Yeah, but in terms of Antonio Brown, this is a concern that he's in an offense with 2 other productive wide receivers and a surprisingly resurgent Rob Gronkowski. So Brown this week was the low man on the totem pole of those 4 guys, one catch for 17 yards, so not much there. Robert Woods has had a slow start to the season. We'll talk a little bit later about Cooper Kupp taking a huge role of that offensive passing game with Matthew Stafford there now. Robert Woods, sort of the low man on the stick. So I was feeling really good after the draft that I got these 4, what I actually considered top 12. And looking back at my draft board, they were all top 12 receivers on my board. A little bit of concern there. A.J. Brown, I agree with you. Tennessee hasn't figured out their passing game, especially. Tannehill has looked awful 2 weeks in a row. Targeted 9 times, that's great, but only 3 of those were connections. So tough there. Obviously, Henry, my gosh, looking like John Henry building the railroad, putting this team on his back and carrying my club in week 2. Great to win games like that. A little bit scary that there was lack of production elsewhere, including Dak Prescott. Tight end continues to be a problem for me. Jonnu Smith, a little bit banged up this week. Still got 5 targets in that Patriots offense. He was my second drafted tight end, so he's pulling the weight after Irv Smith got injured in the preseason. So tight end is definitely my biggest weakness at this point. I am pleasantly surprised by Marvin Jones' production on the bench, wide receiver in Jacksonville. He had a great week 1. He followed it up with 6 for 11 for 55 yards and a score. He's being targeted in that offense by Trevor Lawrence. They seem to have the best connection of all the options there. So he could be a guy that if I start to get nervous or see a bad matchup on the board for Woods or one of the Brown boys, Antonio or AJ, I might sneak Marvin Jones in there if I see a juicy matchup.
Yeah, I would say that Marvin Jones, I don't know if I'd go that far as saying terms of Antonio Brown or A.J. Brown. I think those are your plug-and-play wide receivers. But Robert Woods, I mean, what does Week 1 look like? 3 receptions, 27. He didn't have the touchdown, which kind of saved his day. I could see you playing Marvin Jones over Robert Woods going forward. Jacksonville's kind of weird. They have a rookie quarterback that they're not afraid to throw in the fire. They throw a ton. They don't use James Robinson enough. I have no idea why. Urban Meyer is a mystery to me in Jacksonville. The one thing I will also point out in terms of your club, which I found very interesting, is that Trey Sermon, 1 carry for 8 yards. I don't know if he was concussed after that 1 carry, but as he was inactive Week 1 and with the turmoil in San Fran in terms of their running backs, you obviously hope to see him be way more involved than he currently is. And now with the injury, it just seems like another setback for a guy you kind of took a chance on.
Well, agreed. The San Francisco backfield is an injured mess right now, and thus why I've stashed Jeff Wilson on the IR list.
Mm-hmm.
Picked him up last week. There's a potential once he's back. He's on IR. I think he's able to be back something like Week 5 or Week 6. If that running back field is still in shambles for the 49ers, Wilson might get a shot. He's flashed a couple times in the past, so curious to see if either Sermon or Wilson ends up working out by the end of the year.
Okay, and the over-under win total for you, I'm going to put at is 8. Are you over or under 8 wins?
I don't even know if I want to answer the question. I feel like that's bad fantasy karma.
Okay, well, I'll answer it for you. I go over 8. I think you get 9 wins.
Is it 8 and above?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll take the 8 and above.
Okay. Awesome. Let's move on to the loser of the matchup, Josh Hughes. 110-76, kind of a middle of the range score. Going through his team, Josh Allen with another kind of interesting week. I'm trying to pull up his player card here. 17 points in Week 1, 16 points in Week 2. Obviously, going against Pittsburgh in Week 1, you kind of have to temper your expectations. Week 2, Miami, also a resurgent defense. Better days should be ahead for Josh Allen, but probably not Week 3. Washington football team also has a very stingy defense. So, you might have to temper your expectations for Week 3 with Josh Allen. Going through the rest of his roster here, Rob Gronkowski, 2 touchdowns. It looks like he's, in a Patriot jersey again, just finding targets, finding end zone targets from Tom Brady. Other things, Jonathan Taylor, 15. You like the 15 carries, but couldn't really do much with it. And Daryl Henderson, 13 carries, 53 yards. The touchdown did save him, but you're hoping that he gets more usage out of a backfield. Actually, you saw a little bit of Sonny Michel as well. So that train could be coming, and it really could hurt Daryl Henderson's value going forward. What is the main question for Josh Hughes' team here? I don't know. You obviously like the usage of DK Metcalf, 6 for 11, 53 yards. Had a great Week 1. What do you think about him going forward? Does he seem to be touchdown dependent, or is he still one of those top 5 wide receivers?
I'm okay. I don't have a huge problem with Metcalf. I liked him in the draft. I think he's a good player. I think that Seattle offense is proving that they will put points up on the board. Obviously, Lockett had the big day. It's nice that Lockett can have the big day, but Metcalf can also be targeted 11 times. So I'm not too worried. That seems to be a fairly high volume offense with an elite quarterback. I'm not too worried about Metcalf. I am more worried about Josh Allen. In a game that they win 35-0, obviously game script means that he doesn't need to throw the ball a lot, but he still did. I mean, he threw 33 times. He completed just 17 of those, so about just over 50% completion rate. Not good. 179 yards, not good. Threw an interception. rushed for 35 yards, so it's something. But we're used to, I think, seeing Josh Allen put more rushing yards on the board. So a little bit concerned there, as you alluded to, second week in a row that he had a slightly underwhelming performance. So a little bit of concern for Josh Allen, a very high draft pick. I believe he was the second or third quarterback off the board, if I'm not mistaken.
And I would also, just to butt in here, you'd also like to see him trying to get some goal line carries. It looks like Zach Moss kind of took the goal line carries away from him. Them out to a large lead. You don't really want to put your quarterback in a situation where he could get hurt, like Carson Wentz a few years ago on his QB sneak. So you have to be a little bit concerned that maybe they're trying to hold him back from something like the end zone rushing, red zone rushing plays that made him a top tier quarterback the last couple years.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm kind of a believer in the fact that those are sometimes fluky from year to year, especially for quarterbacks. Getting into the end zone. I think he'll do it. He'll even out his numbers throughout the year, but maybe he just hasn't seen the opportunities to do it. But he'll get his scores this year. But it is something to keep an eye on to see if that is an intentional thing or if it's a fluky thing. The other 2 points I would make on this week is Rob Gronkowski back to form. He is the number one tight end in standard leagues, number 2 in PPR leagues. I don't know where he is in our half-point PPR league, but following
1.
up a great
5.
Right, exactly. So following up a great week 1, he was in there for 81% of the snaps, so hugely involved in that offense. Caught 4 of his 5 balls and scored twice. So he's now got 2 touchdowns in each of the first 2 games. Brady is lighting it up in Tampa. They look very much like the defending Super Bowl champions that they are. Gronkowski just continues to kill it. A big part of this team, and for the value that he returned in the draft, that could be a great thing for Josh moving forward. The other thing, again, something I've mentioned that I may backtrack on a little bit. I've talked a couple times about the 2 Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers. The fact that starting both of those guys with an aging Ben Roethlisberger who's struggling, they may not combine for enough production to keep this team afloat. But for the second week in a row, I think even a little bit better than week 1, both of those guys, put up decent point totals. Juju Smith-Schuster, 13.4 points. Deontay Johnson, 15 points. The thing I like, Schuster's targeted 7 times, and Deontay Johnson was targeted 12 times. So the volume is there, especially now that we've moved to a half-point PPR league. If those guys are able to catch enough balls, they should sustain a decent floor, potentially. It's not necessarily going to be feast or famine, it doesn't look like, in that offense. And that, granted, was in a game that they only scored 17 points. So
Right.
I'm a little bit encouraged by the usage for both of those guys.
Okay, I'm going to put his win total at 7. So above 7 or below?
Oh, man. Each one of these is going to be super tough.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to say I'm going to say 7 or above. I'm going to say 7 or above for Josh.
And I will say, see, I'm like right at 7, but I don't want to agree with you.
I was right at 7 too. I was around that kind of set. Yeah.
I know that's the problem with me saying it, is that I'm going to agree whatever number I said.
Right.
You know what? I'm going to be different. I think he gets under 7 for the year. I just think the Sony Michel thing scares me. I don't think Gronk's going to stick up with it. He's gotten the touchdowns early in the year. I mean, he had 2 in week 1. He has 2 this week. I think that kind of comes back a little bit. I don't think he's going to continue to have those type of touchdown numbers. If he does, he's going to break every record. I just think we're going to see a little bit of regression out of Josh's squad going forward. Next matchup here, we got Alex Eaton, Owings Mills Oysters losing to Cumberland Crusaders by Jake Krieger, 102-42 to 126-82. It looks like Alex really struggled this week. but his running backs got a ton of work. 20 carries for Joe Mixon, 69 yards, and 20 carries for David Montgomery for 61 yards. Not great production, but you do love to see all those carries going to one back, and he has both feature backs for the Bengals and the Bears. When I was looking at this, I was like, okay, yeah, Devontae Adams, great game. Mike Williams, great game. Kyle Pitts, even, he's starting to come into form here, 5 of 6 for 73 yards. My big question is how do you start Jalen Waddle over Marquise Brown against Buffalo? And with Marquise Brown against the Chiefs, where it's probably beforehand, you probably know it's going to be a shootout. If he starts him, does he win? It'd be close. It would be a lot closer than it was. What did you think of that choice of starting Jalen Waddle over Marquise Brown in week 2?
Marquise Brown, what we know of him is that he can have it's feast or famine for him. He's had really great games, and then he's had some games in the last year that have not been so great. Waddle came out, had an excellent week 1, put up 14 fantasy points on the board. I think it was I don't think it was a huge mistake, but what I do think is that Marquise Brown now has proven himself after 2 games that he is going to be a starting wide receiver in fantasy. Very capable player. Obviously, we love to see it, and Lamar's looking for him much more than I think in previous years or last year. Marquise Brown is being targeted all over the field. Targeted 10 times, caught 6 balls for 113 yards and a touchdown. He's going to crack the starting lineup. So I think that's going to be interesting to watch if Alex is able to get him in the lineup moving forward. I think he probably would want to think about doing that. Other than that, in the wide receiver core, did make that pickup of Mike Williams after week 1. It was a good pickup, 7 for 10, 91 yards and a touchdown in week 2. So I think he potentially found a player in free agency in the waiver wire. And you're right. You do love the volume on his running backs. But last week, they got volume and they were productive. This week they got volume and they were not as productive. So it was really the strength of his team last week. But this week they let him down with just some really bad production. I don't think any of them got into the end zone. No, none of them got into the end zone. So that is, you don't like to see that. The last thing I would say on this team, it's kind of a deep cut, if you will, but you've got 2 kickers here.
Yep, I mentioned that last week.
Daniel Carlson is your guy. After 2 weeks, he's made some kicks. Obviously week 1 had the huge kick to save the Raiders from the jaws of defeat in
and
Oakland.
I don't know if I'm doing some breaking news here, but
Vegas.
He's the number 1 overall kicker through 2 weeks.
Number 1, that's right, and that was, we watched him do it again in week 2 against the Steelers, beating the dreaded Steelers. Kicked 3 field goals between 40 and 49 yards, so had a nice big leg, reliable leg. So he is gonna be your kicker.
Going forward.
Jason's, I think he's worth a start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just unfortunate. If he would have started those 2 players, I think he would have blown Jake out of the water. But it's always what ifs when it comes to fantasy. You never know. You should have started this person. You shouldn't have started this person. It's just kind of the way it goes. I am going to put his number at 6. Above or below 6 wins on the season.
He's 0-2.
Yep.
So that doesn't help the odds. I'm gonna take the under on 6 wins.
Okay. And I will take the under as well on 6 wins. Obviously, you like to see that production out of the opportunities out of the running backs. I just didn't really like I don't even remember what grade I gave him, but now looking at it now with the information that we know, not really a huge fan of the squad. But we will see, and hopefully, well, not hopefully for me or you, but hopefully for him, he will prove us both wrong and go on a huge winning streak going forward.
Yeah, can I just say one other thing that
Yep,
I
go ahead.
noticed? Davonte Adams, 8 for 9, 121. Concern on the Packers offense after week one.
Is
They did
over.
start out pretty sluggish in the second week game against the Lions, but they caught fire in the second half. Davonte Adams, Aaron Rodgers, that connection is still alive, so I think he'll be just fine.
Yep, couldn't agree with you more. Going on to Jake's team here, with the victory, the only two teams are 2-0, and he is one of them. I think. Let me fact check that real quick. Yep, there's only two 2-0 teams in the Beltway Wars Invitational. Stafford with a pedestrian day, but he was effective. 19 of 30, 278 yards, 2 touchdowns. Justin Jefferson, great game, 6 of 10, 65 yards, a touchdown. Brandon Cooks continues to defy all the odds of a Houston offense with 9 for 14, 78 and a touchdown. I don't think anyone saw that coming. DJ Moore, great day, 8-11, 79 yards. Darren Waller came back to earth a little bit, but in terms of tight ends, you'll take 65 yards on 5 catches every single day of the week. And then just the cherry on top here, the Buffalo defense with the new defensive scoring in the Beltway Wars Invitational, getting a shutout and getting 22 points to just add to the victory for Jake. My main question for Jake's squad coming out of week 2 is, how afraid are you of Miles Gaskins? 5 carries, 25 yards. He was supposed to be the bell cow for the Miami Dolphins, and it has not even been close to what was been promised. 54% of the snaps in week 1, 61% of the snaps in week 2, and only has a total of 14 carries on the year. How concerned are you with Miles Gaskins?
Very, very concerned about Miles Gaskin. That Miami Dolphins offense looked horrible. Didn't put any points on the board in week 2. As you said, it hasn't gotten to 10 rushing attempts. He's not on the field. He's playing 54% of snaps in week 1 and 61% in week 2. I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. He's in kind of a three-way committee, and he's just not getting the looks that you thought he would get after a really good year last year. So Jake's in my division. I can't say I'm mad about seeing this, especially as he sniped Gaskin from me in the draft. So, but definitely concerning to not have him even getting the work. It'd be different if he was a little unproductive for a couple weeks, but he's just not getting the work, and that's concerning.
Yeah.
For sure.
I would also say, just in terms of trying to be the devil's advocate here, no one has really taken the job by the horns here in Miami. So I do think that going forward, he does have an opportunity to have a more prominent role. There hasn't been anyone that's blown anybody out of the water, scoring multiple touchdowns in 1 week to say that Miles Gaskins now has to take a back seat. So that is the one good news coming out of that Miami backfield.
That is true. And I would say, too, you look to the other running back for Jake's team, Kamara, obviously the 3rd pick of the draft, a down week. So we've been talking about this with a couple other teams. And in week 1, players who don't, the top flight players, elite players that don't perform up to expectations, but you're still able to get a win. So nice for Jake to get that win when Kamara just 8 carries for 5 yards, really, really rough. The Saints offense looks lost without Drew Brees. Jameis Winston not particularly effective, and that's hurting Kamara in the running game there. The last point I would make, we get to see the Bills defense as Jake's defense, putting up 22 points in our revamped defensive scoring, putting up the first shutout of the season. 35-0 at Miami, 6 sacks, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery. So remember, shutouts are now worth, I think there's 7 points in our league. So nice performance there for Jake. And, it was a 25-point game. So, those 7 points definitely played a big factor for the Bills.
Jake is, as you know, 2-0. I'm going to put his number at 9. 9 wins as the over/under.
Yeah, I could see a 9-4 or 10-3. Absolutely. I'll take the over on that.
I will take the over as well. So going on to our next matchup, we had Scott Burnett, the Willie Westminster Wascals, versus Brian Morgan's Timonium
Wiley. The
Tallywhackers.
word is Weiler. Wiley.
Yeah, Wiley Westminster Wascals. But don't make me say that 3 times fast. Brian Morgan beat Scott Barnett 131.02 to 104.88. I wanted to start with Brian's team here. Looking at, we always look at, number one draft picks to see if they're producing, and Aaron Jones came out of nowhere. 3 receiving touchdowns and 1 rushing on the ground. 4 total. And I read something where it was like the first 4 total touchdown day of a running back, Monday night and forever. But, what a night and what a comeback, as we said in the last segment, for that Green Bay offense that was really struggled in week 1 and, really came back to form against Detroit on Monday night. Looking down, the list here, he got production everywhere. Sterling Shepard had -9 yards on 1 carry, but still ended the day with 9 of 10 receptions for 94 yards. Daniel Jones seems to be looking at him early and often, and I don't see that changing in the future. With that offense, it seems that he is the number one option. A lot of people thought it was going to be Kenny Golladay, including myself, but it looks like Sterling Shepard has really taken that job and just ran with it and doesn't really care what free agent signing the Giants do in the offseason. He's just going to be the number one target in New York. CeeDee Lamb having a great day again, 8 of 9, 81 yards. Dallas Goedert, 2 for 2, 24 yards. He had a good week 1. Came back to earth a little bit. We saw a little more of Ertz, actually, for the Eagles in week 2. Don't know how much we're going to be concerned about that, but any split time between tight ends is a tight end death, basically. They need to be on the field as much as possible, and there's not a lot of tight ends out there that really produce a lot of points. My main question for Brian's team going forward is Justin Herbert was going really high up in draft boards to start the season here. 13.38 points in week 1 against Washington and 14.7 against Dallas, who you can definitely score against. Who is his other quarterback on his roster here? Let's take a look. Justin Fields. My goodness.
Yeah.
Is there anything that he can do to remedy the situation, or is he just going to have to ride Herbert out and hope that it gets better?
I don't know. I think you got to hope that it gets better at this point with the draft capital that you've invested in Herbert. The one silver lining, not a great fantasy day for Herbert, but threw the ball 41 times, 338 yards. That's a big number. Had a couple INTs. Overall, I mean, the volume is there in that Chargers passing attack, but just got to clean up the mistakes. He's a second-year player going through some growing pains.
Is all I'm thinking about.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, there's not a whole lot of better options. I think you just kind of got to ride him out at this point and hope that you're getting enough production up and down your lineup to make up for potential deficiencies there. You mentioned Aaron Jones, a great game. Incredibly encouraging to see 6 for 6 in the receiving end of it for Aaron Jones. 3 touchdowns, 3 of his 4 coming of the receiving variety. That's certainly interesting. The other guy there, Austin Eckler, your running back 2, same deal. 9 for 9 receiving for 61 yards. This is becoming a huge trend in the NFL. Pass catching running backs over the last couple of years have really taken off. Eckler. It's interesting. You look at Eckler's week 1 at Washington. He did not get a single target. And then in week 2, home against Dallas, he's 9 for 9. So they found another way to utilize Austin Eckler. It didn't work out for them against the Cowboys this week, but they may have saw a type of defense that Dallas was running and found a vulnerability there in using Eckler in a pass catching role. So that's really encouraging to me to see. Trying to think, I'm missing one thing. Oh, the all the way at the bottom. Well, you can't even see it on the screen, but Odell Beckham, he's got him on IR. Jarvis Landry of the Browns now is going to miss a few weeks with an injury. Beckham could make his season debut in week 3. We'll see. He's coming back from an injury. If that is the case, Beckham, I think you got to see it first. I don't know that you'd stick him in there the first game that he's back, but he has an opportunity now to kind of fill a gap that has been definitely a need for the Browns in terms of pass catchers early on in the season.
I would totally agree with that, and he is the only true tested veteran on that squad with Landry out in terms of wideouts. So I think that he should be the main target monster of the wide receivers for the Browns going forward if Landry is out. I know he's on IR, but it's that weird IR rule where it's 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something along that nature. So
yeah, he'll miss at least three weeks. At least 3 weeks.
Okay. So Brian is 1-1. I'm going to put his over under at 8.
I'm going to take the under on it. We talked about Herbert, question marks there. Shepard, we'll see if he's able to keep it up. Allen Robinson struggling to begin the year. CeeDee Lamb, a nice start to the year, but lots of mouths to feed. Leonard Fournette currently in the flex role with not too much going on the bench behind him. I don't know that this club is extraordinarily deep, so I'm going to take a slight under on that number.
Okay, and I will take, what did I say, 8? So I will take the 8 number. I think he does get to 8 victories on the season. Now going over to the losing side of this matchup, we have Scott Burnett. We mentioned him earlier before. Ryan Tannehill with another disappointing day, 27-40 for 347 yards, so you like the yardage. But no touchdowns, no interceptions, and a fumble loss. Now the 26th ranked quarterback in PPR. Going down through his list here, DeAndre Hopkins, 4 for 4, 54 yards and a touchdown. Very productive day for him, making the most out of his slim opportunities that he did get with Patrick Peterson covering him, former teammate. Adam Thielen, 6 for 7, 39 yards and a touchdown. Jarvis Landry, that one hurts for Scott. 1 for 1, 9 yards, but as we've mentioned before, that he's going to be out 3 weeks on IR with an MCL sprain. Chase Claypool, 3 for 9, 70 yards. Continues to be that big play option in that Pittsburgh defense that's chock full of wide receivers, it would seem. Looking at his team, is it weird for me to say that I think that this team is going to be better in the future than they are now? Now, I don't know if they're going to be a playoff caliber team, but I'm really interested in Javonte Williams now. 14 carries in the first week, and then 13 carries in the second week. I think that he's the guy that they like in Denver, even with Melvin Gordon there. Gordon has outplayed him so far, but in terms of Javonte Williams and Ryan Tannehill, I think that in the future they're going to be playing a lot more and a lot better than we've seen through the first 2 weeks.
I think barring an injury to Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams' ceiling is limited. He played 50% of the snaps in week 1, only 41% of the snaps in week 2. I mean, it's a clear split in Denver. We've seen them utilize multiple backs. I mean, that's something that organization has done for many head coaches ago. They've always been that way. So I don't know that I see it just yet for Javonte Williams in terms of a breakout. And I also have now some concerns about Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, he looked good. He had a nice fantasy day, but right behind him, you've got
Tony
Tony
Pollard.
Pollard
Yep.
knocking down the door. He had a far more effective week 2 than Elliott, with I believe, about the same amount of work. So if Pollard continues to shine, that could be more of a split than you would feel comfortable if you're taking Ezekiel Elliott in the first round. So something to keep an eye on moving forward. But Pollard had an incredible day, so it has me a little bit worried there for Scott and his team. You mentioned Tannehill, not good. Not good at all. 40 attempts, only completing 27 of them. Had a fumble in there. Talked about it earlier. That offense just doesn't know what it's trying to do. Aside from Henry is the dominant guy there. So concern for Tannehill for a second week in a row. And Landry is a big loss. Just looking at the bench depth here, I think your next man up from the wide receiver perspective is probably Christian Kirk. But do you really want to be starting? Arizona's offense has been great, but do you really want to be starting both Hopkins and Kirk in your starting lineup? Russell Gage hasn't done enough in the first 2 weeks to prove that he's a startable fantasy asset. So the depth there starting to look a little bit shallow. Chase Claypool could slide from the flex into a wide receiver position, but then is there a running back on this bench that's capable of starting? And I don't see one.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Just going back to Ezekiel Elliott for one moment, I did watch a little bit of that game on Red Zone, as we're probably all watching Red Zone. Tony Pollard did look better than Ezekiel Elliott. He looked more explosive. He looked more involved in the passing attack. The one thing that will save Ezekiel Elliott from continuing to be on the field is that apparently his pass protection is like bar none the best in the NFL. As you know, Dallas is going to throw the ball a ton with Dak Prescott and all those wide receiver weapons. So I'm a little concerned about Ezekiel Elliott, but you'll always take 16 for 71 and a touchdown on a week. Just something to be a little bit concerned about with Tony Pollard breathing down his neck, as we said. The over-under for Scott is 6.
I'm gonna. He is 1-1. I'm gonna say he gets to 6 for sure. I think at the end of the day, Hopkins and Thielen. We didn't mention Adam Thielen.
Yep.
A second solid week. Had a really incredible week 1. He's number 4 in PPR, number 6 in standard after 2 weeks. His snap percentage in week 1 was 94%. His snap percentage in week 2, 100%. Always on the field, Mr. Thielen, Action Adam Thielen there. I think six wins is doable for Scott. I think he gets there.
I agree as well. I think that he actually gets to 7. I don't know if that's enough to get you in the playoffs. 7-6 is usually the cutoff mark for a wild card spot in the Beltway Wars Invitational. The last thing I want to bring up, Scott, is it looks like Carolina's defense is for real. 4 sacks this week, 2 interceptions, 7 points allowed. They played the Jets week 1, but also are very respectable. They had 6 sacks, a forced fumble, and an interception. So I think that's one of those defenses that you're not really sure of when the season begins, but they actually do look to be for real in 2021. Okay, and so with that, we're going to go to Sarah Hughes versus Tom Fitzhugh. So the Pasadena Penguins lost to Finksburg ? 150.5 to 99.4. So our biggest disparity in terms of fantasy football matchups in week 2. And wow, just talking about Tom's team here. Aaron Rodgers came back with it. He must have heard my podcast and was like, you know what, Adam? I'm going to dunk all over you. And that's what he did. 22 of 27, 255 yards, 4 touchdowns. He even got in 4 carries for 6 yards. And then Najee Harris, great day, 10 for 38, which you don't like, but 5 receptions for 43 and a touchdown. Julio Jones, the best wide receiver on the field for the Tennessee Titans, 6 for 8, 128. He should have had a bigger day. He got a touchdown called back, which should not have been called back. He was definitely inbounds in the end zone. And Mike Evans must have heard you last week. as he
Yeah.
went 5 for 9, 75 yards and 2 touchdowns. I saw that game early, and it looked like they understood that they did not get him involved in week one as much as they wanted, and Tom Brady got him involved early and often. He was targeted very much early in the game, so I think that was a focal point to get him involved early. What's there to say? It was a great week. Tampa Bay, 3 interceptions, a touchdown. You'd love to see that. Eli Mitchell, the hot waiver wire pickup of week one. 17 carries, 42 yards, but it looks like he is going to be questionable listed day to day. It looks like. My question is is Aaron Rodgers going to be a top 3 quarterback going forward?
Top three, no, I don't think so. But I think he'll be, middle of the pack, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in that range. I think he'll be definitely a capable enough fantasy starter. It's been a mixed bag after 2 weeks, but I think that he will be definitely startable week in and week out. Big day, 4 touchdowns. We already talked about it. Very efficient, 4 touchdowns. Only threw 27 times. Didn't need to once they started to blow out the Lions. I think he will be fine, but I don't think he is no longer a superstar elite quarterback in the NFL. But we'll see. He could prove me wrong. Speaking of proving me wrong, Julio Jones and Mike Evans, I was right about them after the first week, but they proved me wrong here in week two. Both of them had a nice day, both very involved in their respective offenses, both on winning teams. The Tennessee Titans with Julio Jones won, I think, in overtime at Seattle, and the Bucks put up 48 big ones on the Falcons. So both of those guys had a nice day. I think it's going to be interesting to watch these two players from week to week, both veterans in offenses that were expected to be pretty dynamic. The Bucks have been so far, the Titans not so much, at least in the passing attack. So we'll see how that shakes itself out moving forward. It was a bounce back week for those two guys, for sure. One that it was not a bounce back for because he had an excellent week one and follows it up with an excellent week two is tight end Tj Hockinson. Now the third ranked tight end after 2 weeks, a big 21 spot in week one, a big 16 point effort in week two. Heavily utilized in this Jared Goff-led passing attack for the Lions. 8 for 11 in week one, 8 for 9. 8 receptions on 9 targets this week. Scoring in both weeks. He's heavily used. You can tell Goff is looking for him. He's going to be a solid guy that was, kind of one of the middle tight ends taken in the draft that is putting up big numbers, and the usage is so encouraging. In a league now where it's so hard to find kind of those middle of the road guys that are getting a lot of volume, it's nice to have Hockinson on your team.
Yeah, I would say Hockinson is definitely one of those tight ends that no one's talking about, that in a few weeks everyone's going to be talking about. Tom looks like he got a sweet steal in terms of drafting him. And it's paid dividends. 21 points in the first week, 16 points in the second week. I don't foresee that ever really going under with the lack of playmakers in that Detroit offense. It seems to be him and him alone in the passing attack. The over under for Tom. Wow, so he had a disappointing week one, and week two he had a great, the best week of week two. I'm going to put his over under at 7.
Well, we didn't mention it. We don't have to talk too much about it, but he's got a nice bench. He's got a lot of depth on this team. Guys that are putting up points from Henry Ruggs. He's got Tyshawn Williams, Melvin Gordon on the bench right now. I am going to take the under still. I think
hot take. Someone calls Skip Bayless. Someone calls
tough,
Stephen A. Smith.
Look, the name of this team, Tom named this question marks team after my comment. I'm not gonna back down from that. I still think there are some question marks at the wide receiver position. I still am not too much of a fan of Antonio Gibson in Washington. I think there's enough here that is still questionable enough that I'm not ready to change my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I would like to agree with you, but I think that there's just so much depth. He can take one or two injuries, which a lot of teams cannot do, and I think still be okay. Tyshawn Williams for the Ravens, I don't think he's going anywhere. Honestly, I think he's going to get the majority of the work. The better he gets in pass protection, I think the more and more work he's going to get. He was the most effective back in Baltimore's backfield against the Chiefs. 13 carries, 77 yards. I'm going to take the over on 7 for Tom Fitzhugh going forward. Now, going on to the losing side of this matchup, we had Sarah Hughes, Pasadena Penguins, with only 99.4 points. Anytime you don't crack 100, that is horrible. You don't like to see that. Now, it wasn't for the fact that Kyler Murray didn't have a good day, 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. There's 2 picks, but he did have 5 rushing attempts, 31 yards, and a touchdown. Tyreek Hill, I think that's the biggest disappointment for her in week 2 against the Baltimore Ravens defense that got thrashed by Derek Carr and the wide receivers, Henry Ruggs and Braylon Edwards. You obviously thought that he was going to have a bigger day against the Baltimore beat up secondary, but only had 3 receptions for 14 yards and 1 carry for 15. Better days ahead for Tyreek Hill. I'm not concerned about him at all. Devon Singletary, great day, 1382 and a touchdown. Seems to have fought off Zach Moss. It looks like they use Zach Moss more in mop-up duty, so I think Devon Singletary still the prime back in Buffalo. She did take our advice and did play him in the flex when we said that she should over Brandon Ayuk. That was obviously a correct decision. The most interesting person on her roster is Cordell Patterson. 7 carries for 11 yards, a touchdown, 5 for 6, 58, and a touchdown. He is like the Swiss Army knife of that Atlanta offense. He can catch it, he can run it. He was obviously a wide receiver for the first part of his career, punt returner, kickoff returner. Now he's labeled as a running back in Atlanta. Could he be a top 20 running back going forward?
No, not with only 33% of snaps in both week 1 and week 2. Absolutely not. He's a gadget player. He always has been a gadget player. It's intriguing to watch. He's been around the league for a while. He's been on many, many teams. Well, I think a few. And I don't know, he's 30 years old now. He was a hot commodity coming out of college and was thought that he would be the next big thing. Every couple years, I feel like you see him flash for a couple games. Once teams figure out how the Falcons are working him into the offense, I think they'll be more prepared for it. He's giving teams looks that they're not familiar with, but I think once there's more of a track record of him in this offense, they're going to figure him out. But to your point, Sarah's team, I mean, he's one of the bench players. I think one of my points for this week for Sarah is the starters really struggled, but there are some badasses on this bench in week 2. Kirk Cousins, nice day as a backup quarterback there. Obviously not Kyler Murray territory. Could Kirk Cousins be a trade chip down the line if he continues to play this way? Cordell Patterson, the big day. James White continues to be involved in the Patriots game planning. 5 carries, 20 yards and a touchdown, but caught 6 balls for 45 yards. He was involved in that offense. J.D. McKissick, another guy, similar stat line to James White. 4 carries, 10 yards, but caught 5 balls. So he's a guy, on that Washington football team. Could he turn into sort of a multi-purpose running back, pass catcher? He always has kind of had that identity. He's a good player if they can figure out how to use him on a consistent basis. Michael Pittman, 8 for 12 in that Indianapolis Colts passing attack, 123 yards, 16 fantasy points. So pieces on this bench do allow Sarah to mix and match. So it'll be interesting to see her decisions moving forward. Kyler is obviously amazing. I mean, the second straight week of 33 fantasy points. He was efficient. He threw for 400 yards. He threw for 3 touchdowns, and he rushed for a fourth one. So huge day for him. The number one quarterback in fantasy after 2 weeks. Yeah, continued struggles for Brandon Ayuk. Not sure he's still in the doghouse, in Shanahan's doghouse there in San Francisco. I don't know where he was drafted in our draft, but he's not living up to whatever position. But certainly, it's possible that once he gets out of the doghouse, he could be an elite. Not elite, but a very serviceable fantasy wide receiver. So if that happens, that'll give Sarah even more depth for this.
Well, Sarah's at 0-2. Not how you want to start the season. I'm going to put her over under at 6. What do you think?
I'll go under still. These two teams, Sarah and Tom, were my lower graded teams this year. So I think you best quarterback in football, but I think it's just lacking a little bit of depth. Tyreek Hill, a bad week. Is he going to be a boom or bust guy? Just enough question marks. Although the talent on the bench certainly could prove me wrong.
I agree as well. I would go under on 6, and I just think that it would be hard for her to pick the correct players. I think a lot of her players are going to be boom or bust, and it's going to be hard to pick which ones are going to be productive off her bench and to insert them into the starting lineups. Going on to our last matchup of week 2 is Halthorpe Hellbringers lost to Charlie Wynn's Reisterstown Rebels 106-06 to 143-52. Let's start with Mike here. Lamar Jackson came back to form with 32 points with an amazing comeback win against the Chiefs. Obviously, when your quarterback gets 16 carries and 107 yards and 2 touchdowns, that's going to be a huge, huge day for any quarterback. Let's see what he is ranked in terms of quarterback. He's number 6, so it's a little under where he was drafted so far. But I think that going forward, he's a top 5 play week in and week out. Concerns, man. There's a lot of them. Let's start with Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
84% of snaps, but only 13 attempts and 4.38 yards per carry, and not really even involved in the passing offense. Only 2 receptions on 3 targets. He's probably still nursing that ACL from the offseason. You're hoping that he doesn't have any setbacks. It's just kind of a shame at this point of where he was drafted. He does not look to be 100%. You would have liked to see more out of Kendrick Drake. It was against Pittsburgh, but with Josh Jacobs out, his usage is going to be limited when Josh Jacobs comes back. It's his show, and Kendrick Drake is kind of the complementary to him. As someone who has a lot of stock in Kenny Golladay and other leagues, I have no idea what the heck they're doing in New York with him. They signed him to the big off-season contract. You thought he was going to be the focal point of the offense, but he's 3 for 8 for 38 yards. I thought that Daniel Jones would just be feeding him early and often. That is not the case whatsoever. As we mentioned earlier, Sterling Shepard has been taking the reins of the wide receiver group in New York. Devontae Smith had a rookie game, 2 for 7, 16 yards. You're going to have to expect that out of rookie wide receivers. I'm really concerned with this roster and the way it's constructed. As I mentioned before, Kenny Golladay, Saquon Barkley, where is he going to get that week in and week out production? Am I crazy to think that he might have one of the weakest starting lineups in the Beltway Wars Invitational?
Potentially, and this is of course the team that lost Raheem Mostert. I think after, right? Is he the team that lost Mostert, or was that my team?
You had Mostert, didn't you?
I had Mostert. Who did? Oh, I'm sorry. I had Mostert.
They had
Mike,
Travis and
Mike
Tannehill.
had Travis Etienne. That's right.
ETN,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, see how quickly I put Mostert in the back of my mind. That was not pleasant. I didn't know him for very long. He was only there
Oh
for a
yeah.
week. Yeah, the big injury to Etienne to begin the year, and then Barkley. Just something's not right there. It doesn't feel right. He was supposed to be returning. I understand working him slowly into the offense. Definitely increased his snaps percentage in week 2, but just again, sluggish on the ground, not doing a whole lot, not showing a whole lot. That team is proving that they're able to throw the ball relatively effectively to Sterling Shepard at least. So I don't know what's going on there. I don't know what to think about it, but 2 weeks in a row with underwhelming fantasy totals is not good. Not good at all for Barkley. You just start, the more this keeps up, the more you wonder, it's just something is just not right there with Barkley.
Yeah.
Kenyon Drake, yeah, you get the news that midweek that Josh Jacobs is going to miss the game. You're excited to get Kenyon Drake in there. You think he's going to be the bell cow. He does a very Kenyon Drake thing. He goes 7 carries for 9 yards, 5 for 6 for 46, saves his day to at least give him 8 points fantasy-wise. But 7 carries for 9 yards, just awful. It was against a stout Pittsburgh defense, but still, man, you gotta do better than that.
And the corpse of Peyton Barber outcarried him 13-7. So
that's right. That's
not
right.
really good news for Kenyon Drake owners.
No, and it just solidifies that Drake is not really viewed as much more than a passing downs kind of back there, which he has been in recent years in his career. The last thing I would mention, a bright spot here, Higbee though had a bad day at tight end, but Noah Fant on the bench had a nice day, 4 for 6, 33 yards and a touchdown. With the injuries that are going on in the Denver wide receiver core, with Jerry Jeudy, Noah Fant might have an increased role moving forward. Has played on 3/4 of the snaps both week 1 and week 2. 8 targets the first week, 6 targets the second week. Scored in week 2. So, potentially a guy that could crack the starting lineup in some weeks. And if Higbee and Fant both turn out to be startable commodities, you may end up, just given the injuries on this team and the uncertainties, you may end up starting both of these guys at some point this year. Yeah, I don't know. Tough.
Yeah.
Tough.
I completely agree. That's something that he'll have to look forward to. I'm going to put his over-under at 7. Is he getting to 7 wins?
I'm gonna take the under on there.
I would take the under as well. I think that's all that needs to be said on that front. Going on to our last team, and certainly not least, 2-0, Charlie win. Reisterstown Rebels 143-52. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes, great day, even in the loss against Baltimore. Christian McCaffrey, 24 carries, 72 yards. No concerns about his health. I think he got knocked out a tiny bit in the game, but I think he did come back and play, and there's no injury concerns there. Chris Carlson, 13 carries, 31 yards, but the 2 touchdowns. He's obviously the bell cow in Seattle and the most trusted running back in Seattle. Cooper Kupp, wow, 9 for 11, 163, 2 touchdowns. He's quickly becoming Matthew Stafford's favorite target in LA, doing a great job, very trusted by him, obviously. 32.3 points. What is he now? He is the number 1 overall PPR wide receiver in fantasy football after week 1 and week 2, 20 points in week 1, 32 in week 2. Damian Harris for the running back for the Patriots, 12.9 points. There was some concerns that he would lose some carries because of his costly fumble in week one. That didn't really seem to be the case. He's the most talented running back on the roster for the Patriots, 16 for 62 and a touchdown there. In terms of Charlie's team, I think we said this at the beginning of the draft or after the draft in our recap show that this is one of the most talented teams in the Beltway Wars Invitational. Is Charlie Wynn, and I can't believe I'm saying this, the favorite, the early season favorite to take home the Beltway Wars Invitational Championship?
Right now, yeah, and this was what I said coming out of the draft. I thought he had the best draft in the league, and this is a very much a set it and forget it type of lineup. Just looking at the starters here, there's really no tough decisions at this point in the season that Charlie has to make, except for maybe who slots in as sort of the third receiver spot. He's got Nelson Aguilar, which may be a questionable decision in week two. I understand that he had a good week one, but to start him over Tyler Boyd, he's got Tim Patrick, who is proving that he is going to be a guy in Denver that has some, he could be a starter in bye weeks coming up with injuries. Patrick is good bench depth to have there. Same thing with Rondale Moore. 20 points for the Cardinals. We talked a little bit earlier about the mouths to feed in Arizona, but 7 for 8, 114, and a touchdown on his bench. He's got options there. And other than that third wide receiver spot, the rest of these starting positions are pretty much set and forget it. Cooper Kupp, I mean, my gosh, another huge day, 2 touchdowns, 163 yards, catching 9 of 11, played 100% of the snaps. He's the number 1 wide receiver in PPR leagues, number 2 in standard. He is Stafford's guy. He's locked in on him, and he is proving that he's a elite wide receiver in the National Football League. So, I mean, not much to say here other than the Aguilar decision. There's not much else to say.
Just to leave off when we go to our grade for Charlie, Robert Tanya had a nice bounce back week in week 2. 3 catches for 52 yards and a touchdown. I think as Aaron Rodgers goes, he's going to go. So I think that he's going to be a late round tight end that's going to be proving to be a valuable commodity for Charlie. That's, obviously his whole roster is pretty star-studded. I think that he's a little bit overlooked, but I think he's going to be important down the stretch here in terms of that. So with that, let's go to his win total. I'm going to have it at 9. Is he over, under 9?
I will take the over.
I will take the over as well. And coming up in our next segment, we're actually going to have Charlie Wynn on the phone and to discuss some things in terms of his roster, his team, his future, what he thinks, and maybe get into a little bit of trash talk. So we will see you then. And welcome back to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast. On the phone, we have none other than himself, Charlie Wynn of the Reisterstown Rebels. How's it going tonight, Charlie? How are you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
We are doing fantastic here. 2-0. Well, the biggest trash talker of the Beltway Wars Invitational. And a very star-studded team. You'll be able to hear the podcast when it comes out of the rave reviews that we had of your squad. Pat, did you want to start us off here?
Yeah, well, congratulations. After 2 weeks, we just got done talking about your team. It'll air in our when Adam releases this. But we both had some high praise. 2-0, obviously a pretty star-studded starting lineup, and we were just talking about you don't really have a whole lot of decisions to make. Your lineup seems like it's pretty set it and forget it. You have a decision to make in your wide receiver 3 spot. You made the slightly questionable decision to start Nelson Aguilar there in week 2. Didn't really work out for you, but what do you think your lineup? are there any decisions? Doesn't seem like you've had to make too many tough calls early on in the year. How you feeling about that?
I'm feeling pretty good about my team. I drafted what I wanted. I had a game plan, and right now I'm just on autopilot for the rest of the next, let's see, 4 or 5 weeks. I don't think I actually will have any trouble until probably week 8. So I'm feeling pretty
Well,
good.
who do you play in week 8? Or is that just a big bye week for you?
Yeah, there's a big bye week for me, and I don't know. Jake and Josh are two that I'm a little worried about, but everyone else is pretty mediocre.
Mm, boy, you weren't kidding. King trash talker over here.
um,
Um,
well, just going on to your first overall pick, Christian McCaffrey, obviously a complete stud. Number 2 in PPR for running backs, so far through 2 weeks. Was there any decision with the number 1 overall pick to go with anyone else named other than named Christian McCaffrey, or was that pretty set in your mind from the get-go?
It was set right off the bat. I knew that McCaffrey and Mahomes was going to be my 1 and 2.
hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is. I mean, I said it coming out of the draft. It was my favorite team in the league coming out of the draft, bar none. And so far, it's proving me right there. Did you have, other than sort of the McCaffrey Mahomes thing starting the draft? When you go into a draft, do you have any kind of strategy that you're looking to do? Are you a guy that's going to wait? You get Tunyon there in the 7th round, so you come out with a pretty standard. After 6 rounds, you've got 3 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a QB. Is that how you were looking to build this team?
It was exactly how I was looking to build. See, I have a blueprint. I actually am going to reveal that the way I draft is um, by the position. So I usually go running back, quarterback. It's all planned out. So I'm
Hmm.
just surprised that all the picks that I ended up getting were just unbelievable players. So I feel really good about this season.
Well,
Hmm.
Charlie exposing some of the secret sauce recipe here of how to draft a solid squad for the Beltway Wars Invitational here. Going through your squad, like we said before, it's not really much weakness here. The one thing I would say is, how concerned are you with the Tampa Bay offense? So many playmakers on offense, especially at the wide receiver core. Chris Godwin, had a great day, 4 for 5, 62 yards and a touchdown. Are you concerned about his usage at all? Getting enough targets in that offense with Tom Brady spreading the ball around as much as he does in Tampa Bay?
Well, he hasn't given me any concern so far. I mean, first week, 19 points. Second week, 14.2. I mean, if he stays up like that, he has a touchdown each game so far, so I'm liking what I see.
Pat, do you have anything else for Charlie or?
No, I mean, I'm curious if you had to. I don't know if you're looking at anything on your team that you're considering as a weakness at this point, or if there's any position that, whether it be with a trade or in free agency or the waiver wires, or any kind of need that you think you need to fill, that if you're assessing your team, saying, hey, might have a weakness at this position.
Honestly, I don't see any weaknesses. Right now, I'm just looking at the waiver wire, and I'm just actually offensively picking players off so that other teams can't get them. I'm at that point right now, and
Mm.
yeah, just a little sneak peek into my mentality when I'm attacking this. I mean, my next opponent coming up here is Sarah, and she's playing god awful so far. So
Mm.
I'm gonna go 3-0, and she's gonna go 0-3.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I was
Oh
just gonna
boy.
leave us off with if Charlie wanted to say any smack to any of your divisional co-patriots here of Tom or Sarah. Obviously, you had something very, very negative to say about Sarah's squad. What do you think about Tom's squad? Big 150 point this week. You have anything,
You know
any
what?
smack to talk about him?
You know, I'm proud that he got it up that far, but I spanked him pretty bad the first week, so he had to come back and prove that his team wasn't garbage. So very proud of him.
Okay, well, I think that's all we got for Mr. Charlie Wynn here, manager of the Ricestown Rebels, off to a 2-0 start. And we're very excited to see what you have in the future. Like we said, we think that you have one of the stronger teams in the Beltway Wars Invitational, and I think you're going to be a tough beat when it comes playoff time if everything holds up. So, Charlie, thank you for coming on to the show, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thank
What's
you for
up?
having me.
Oh, no problem.
Use this as a community service. That's you guys don't have a lot of viewers.
All right.
Ouch.
Well,
And
that
shot on the
was
way out.
Charlie.
Boy, oh boy.
And that's the end of our show. Thank you all for tuning in and listening in. And we will be back next week for the Week 3 recap. Say goodbye, Patrick, and goodbye, everybody.
See you later. Good luck.